Okay, today we're getting into another topic which is near and dear to my heart, Apache Cordova. This is a framework that you can use to build mobile applications and desktop applications with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You don't need to learn C#, Objective-C, Swift, Java, C++, or any other language. You can simply use the existing skills that you have with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to create mobile applications, and you can build them for multiple platforms. So going back a little bit in time, back in 1996, Palm came out with the Palm Pilot, which was a great little mobile device for keeping track of appointments and stuff like that. 1999, BlackBerry came out, and they had the first phone that had limited email capability and limited browsing capability. So this was a big jump forward in technology. Jump forward, 2007. 2007, the iPhone came out. 2008, the first Android phones came out. 2009, Windows Mobile was launched. 2010, we had the iPad. So huge amount of change over that 4-year period. iPhone coming out as the first phone where you really could properly browse the internet. BlackBerry had the capability, but the browser was a little bit wonky. The browser didn't work that well with most websites. iPhone changed that. iPhone actually allowed people to start browsing online, and that's where the shift from browsing on desktops and laptops to phones really began. 2009, after the launch of Windows Mobile, there was a company out in British Columbia, Canada, called Nitobi, and the engineers working there were tired of having to learn all these different languages and all these different frameworks and all these different platforms. And they said, wouldn't it be great if we could just use the same technology that we're already using for all of our website and web development and apply that for building something across all these mobile platforms? They'd sent a few of their guys actually down to Seattle for a conference on learning Objective-C and how to develop things for the iPhone. While they were at that conference, a few of the engineers got together and came up with this idea. So fast forward a couple of years, Adobe purchased PhoneGap, and after purchasing PhoneGap, they, the next day, released PhoneGap to the world as an open source project to the Apache Foundation called Cordova. So now we have two things. There's Adobe PhoneGap, which is the commercial version that you can pay Adobe to get tech support. They will do all the compiling of your app. They will help you debug your app. Lots of great services involved in that, and this is the choice that some large companies take, is using PhoneGap. Cordova, the open source version of it. Both of them are really the same code base. Both Adobe and the open source community are all contributing to the project, and whatever gets updated gets passed back and forth between the two of them. People who write plugins to work with Cordova also work with PhoneGap, and the other way around as well. So, fantastic tool. Allows us to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We've got support within Cordova for writing apps for iOS, Android, Windows Phone 8, Windows, OS X, Ubuntu, and previously Firefox OS. That was an attempt by Mozilla to jump into the cell phone market in developing markets, most notably Brazil and India. They did manage to sell a fair number of phones there. Firefox OS was an operating system designed to let you build apps in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which also, coincidentally, back in 2009, Palm had tried. They had come up with a new web OS, which was a Linux-based operating system that allowed you to build and run apps in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So, all of that history leading us to the point where we now have Cordova, and version 7 has recently come out, so version 7.0.1 is the version that I have installed on my computer. So I want to take you through what you need to know about this. So to run Cordova, you need to have Node.js installed. So nodejs.org is the website. If you haven't installed it, download Node.js. You need to have that on your computer. So it comes with a packaging tool called npm. npm is what we use to install Cordova, and we also use it to install the platforms and the plugins. Now, just Cordova on its own, that's the framework. That gives you all the tools to build your apps. When you want to actually compile for Android or iOS or Windows Phone or BlackBerry or whatever platform that you're doing, when you go to do the compiling part, you do need to have the SDK for the platform that you're targeting. So if you're doing Android development, you do need the Android SDK. If you're doing iOS development, you need the iOS SDK. Easiest way to get those two for Android, I'm going to do another video on this, but for Android, install Android Studio. For iOS or OS X, install Xcode. That's the tool. So I'll do another video on setting up the platforms, but right now I just want to walk you through a basic introduction to it. So we have the Apache Cordova website, the documentation page, or site rather. You can see up at the top here, you can switch through all the different versions, 7 being the latest. Lots and lots and lots of documentation available to you here. There is a site for plugins as well. You can search for plugins. The cool thing about Cordova is, yes, you're using your existing skills with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to build your app, but through the Cordova framework and plugins, you get access to all the native capabilities of these devices. So if I wanted to do something with Bluetooth, and I know that the Bluetooth API is not working properly in the browsers yet, so here, I search for Bluetooth, and you can see there are a whole bunch of plugins for using Bluetooth. So here's a Bluetooth Low Energy. So you can search through those plugins. Documentation, great place to get started. Creating your first app will walk you through a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. So jumping over to my terminal. So I've created a folder called Cordova. It is empty. There's nothing inside of this folder. What I need to do, because I've got Node installed, and I can double check that. There we go. I've got version 8.2.1 of Cordova, of Node installed. I can use Node npm to install Cordova. So I'd say npm install Cordova-g globally. So I want to be able to run the Cordova commands from anywhere in my operating system on the terminal. -g is the global. Now I've already got version 7.0.1 installed, but it's going to go through this install process anyway. Okay, so Node we have installed, which gives us npm. npm allows us to install Cordova. Once Cordova is installed, we can now run the Cordova commands. And there's a whole bunch of these commands. Cordova create is the command. All these Cordova commands begin with the word Cordova. Create means I'm creating a brand new project. And I'm inside a folder called Cordova. It doesn't have to be called Cordova. This is just the name of my folder. Create, I'm going to create a new app called My App. There are 3 parameters that I have to put after create. This basically is going to be the name of the folder where I'm creating my project. The second part is the package name. So internally in your phone doesn't call the app Twitter. There is a special unique name that gets used by your phone to reference the Twitter app or any other app. And reverse domain name is typically what gets used. So let's say that I have the URL steve.griffith.ca. Let's say that is my website. So because I own that domain, stevegriffith.ca, nobody else in the world can use that domain. So I'm assured that this part is going to be unique. Then, by putting a unique name for my app at the end of this, This entire string is going to be unique, and I know when I install it on the phone, it's not going to conflict with anybody else's apps. Nobody else's apps should conflict with mine. Okay, and then the final one is the name for your application. I run that, it says creating new Cordova project, done. Now when I list, there it is. My app is the folder. So I will move into that folder, and ls, let's do it as a list like this. There we go. This is the contents of my app folder, my Cordova project folder. There is a www folder. This is where all of your HTML, your CSS, your JavaScript, your images, your media files, basically your Cordova app is a website that will be wrapped within a web view. So a web view is like a browser without the tabs, without the menu, without all that. It's just an empty shell container that knows how to render HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This is the website that's going to be rendered inside that view. There are two settings files, config.xml and package.json. Config.xml, up until version 7, this was the setting file. Starting with version 7, package.json is now the main setting file. This is the one that takes priority. And just for backwards compatibility, they include both. You don't have to use both, but actually you shouldn't use both. Use one or the other. But if both exist, package.json will win out whenever there's a conflict between the two of them. Platforms, this is where content, so I said you had to have the Android SDK installed. Platforms is where that information is going to be stored. Plugins, again, all those plugins like the Bluetooth Low Energy one, they will be stored inside of here. Resources, this is additional resources for your website, your icons and things like that. Hooks, these are special build tools that can go in here. And there's another one that doesn't get put in here at the very beginning, which is for CSS and JavaScript when you've got different versions of your CSS and JavaScript based on different platforms. The folder's called merges, and inside the merges folder you will have an iOS folder, an Android folder, and so on. One folder for each of the platforms that you're compiling for, and the different versions of the CSS, the different versions of the JS files will go inside those folders. Alright, taking a quick look inside of the www folder. Right now there's nothing in the platforms. If I went cd platforms, nothing's inside there. So I'll come back up. Oops, 3 W's in www. There we go. This is what's inside the www folder. You have a CSS folder, an image folder, a JS folder, and an HTML file. So I'm going to jump over to brackets and I'm going to open up, here's my app, and www, here's the index.html file. A whole bunch of Apache license comments, lots of comments in the basic file. Content security policy, very important that you use this. I'll have another video where I talk about this. This is going to tell your app what it's allowed to load and not load. So your JavaScript files, your images, media files, you have to tell it what's allowed to be included. Very important for security. The viewport meta tag, which allows your app to scale properly. Link to the CSS. There's a default CSS file that's included. This is just basic content that they throw in just so you've got something there. I'm going to run this and show you what it looks like in the emulator. This file, if you open it in a regular browser, you're going to see a 404 error. This file gets added by Cordova during the build process. You don't actually have to have a Cordova file inside this folder. That gets added during the build process. And then index.js, this is the JavaScript file that they give you at the very beginning. They include the same comments, and this basic bit of JavaScript, all they're really doing is listening for an event called device ready, and then they're animating something on the screen. That's all this is doing. It's adding CSS classes so that it will They're hiding and showing and then animating something. Device ready is an event that exists inside the Cordova.js file. Basically, if you're familiar with DOM content loaded, which I hope you are, that event fires, and then Cordova checks to make sure that all the plugins have loaded. Once all the plugins are loaded and DOM content loaded has fired, it will fire the device ready event, and that should be the trigger for whatever script you want to run. So you will always have a line like this where you are listening for device ready, and then after that, that is when you start your JavaScript running. Okay, so let's jump over to the terminal again. We saw that there was nothing in platforms, so I want to add in the Android platform so I can use this. So we'll say Cordova platform add Android. And there it is. It's gone off to fetch version 6.2.2 of the Cordova Android code. Just takes a moment to do this. In the meantime, I will make sure, yes, I've got my emulator up and running. There we go. So that's all set up. And now Cordova emulate Android. So there's a bunch of these commands. There's build, run, emulate. Build, you just want to compile the project. You're going to do something with the native code yourself. You're going to run it somewhere yourself or copy it. Emulate, you want to build it and then launch it on the emulator. There's a launch command, or sorry, a run command, which means that you want to build it, install it on the emulator or device, and then launch it as well. And we're doing emulate, which will do the build, the installing it on the device, and then launching it on the emulator. Sorry, not on the device, on the emulator. So I will run that command. The first time you do this, Gradle is the tool that Android uses for compiling everything, and the very first time that you do this, it can take 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes sometimes. After it's run once, it's much faster for the subsequent runs. There we go, so that was 17 seconds. And there it is. There's my app. It's running. This is the little thing that was animated. There was another element here that was removed or hidden, and then this one was shown, and then the CSS is making it fade in and out. There's a little animation that loops. And that's what you get. That's the sample app that you can then use to make changes. So if I close this, and I'm going to close that app, I look inside of here. App name. Remember when I created it, that was the name that I gave it. And press and hold, uninstall. I'm going to get rid of it just so I know it's not on the device at all. Great. Now I'm going to come back over to here, Apache Cordova. And I'm going to say Steve's Cordova 7.01. app. That's going to be my new title. Yeah, that's all the changes I'm going to make. Come back into here, and I'm going to rerun the emulate, which is going to rebuild the project, take the latest copies of my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, put them in, install, and launch success. And there it is. There's my new title. So that's all it takes. If you can edit HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can build mobile apps using Cordova. Alright, so there will be lots more videos in this series. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.